A female billionaire CEO looked into the eyes of a struggling single dad in front of an entire ballroom and quietly asked, "Why won't you date me?" What happened next was not the answer anyone expected. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the polished marble floor of the Kensington Foundation's annual charity gala, while the soft melody of a grand piano drifted through the air like a memory too gentle to hold. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and journalists filled the room with polished smiles and practiced conversations. But every voice faded the moment Charlotte Kensington stepped away from the stage. At 38, she had built one of America's fastest-growing technology companies into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Yet the confidence that usually defined her seemed strangely absent as she crossed the ballroom with calm determination. Her elegant navy evening gown reflected the golden lights above, but her attention rested on only one man standing quietly beside a display of children's artwork. Ethan Walker wore a perfectly pressed charcoal suit that had clearly seen more than one formal occasion. Nothing about him suggested wealth or influence. He was simply a 41-year-old single father from a small repair garage outside Denver who had accepted an invitation after donating months of free mechanical work to a nonprofit serving military families. While others admired expensive watches and exclusive partnerships, Ethan studied the colorful paintings made by children who still believed kindness could change the world. His wedding band was gone, but the faint mark remained on his finger, like a promise time refused to erase. Charlotte stopped only a few feet away. Conversation slowed. Cameras quietly shifted toward them. Even the musicians seemed to lower their volume without realizing why. She offered a gentle smile that carried none of the authority people feared in boardrooms. "Ethan," she said softly, "may I ask you something?" He turned with the same calm expression that had puzzled her since the day they first met 6 months earlier beside a broken-down vintage Mustang on a lonely Colorado highway. "Of course," he answered. Charlotte took one careful breath before asking the question everyone in the room would remember for years. "Why won't you date me?" A ripple of surprise swept across the ballroom. Some guests exchanged amused glances. Others waited for the humble mechanic to laugh nervously before accepting what many men would have considered the opportunity of a lifetime. Ethan remained still. His eyes held no excitement, no embarrassment, only quiet respect. He looked at Charlotte as though her fortune had never mattered and never would. For several long seconds, the silence grew heavier than applause. Then he answered with a voice so steady that every heart in the room seemed to pause with it. "Because every woman who has ever become important in my life has eventually left my daughter behind, and I promised myself I would never ask her to survive that kind of goodbye again." Charlotte's smile disappeared. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Around them, no one spoke. The cameras lowered. The whispers vanished. In a room built on power, success, and influence, the only thing anyone could hear was the sound of one broken promise echoing through another person's heart. 6 months earlier, before photographers followed every glance and before whispered conversations filled elegant ballrooms, Ethan Walker was exactly where he wanted to be. The familiar buzz of fluorescent lights echoed across Walker Auto Repair just outside Denver, while the rich scent of motor oil, fresh coffee, and sawdust blended into the ordinary rhythm of another Tuesday morning. A faded American flag hung proudly above the tool cabinet, its edges softened by years of faithful service, and an old country song played quietly from a radio that occasionally crackled with static. Ethan tightened the final bolt on an aging pickup truck before wiping his hands with a clean shop towel. Honest work had never made him wealthy, but it had given him something he valued far more. It allowed him to keep every promise he still could. At exactly 3:15 every afternoon, no matter how busy the garage became, he closed his toolbox for 15 minutes and drove to Pine Ridge Elementary to pick up his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. The regular customers knew the routine so well that nobody ever complained. Some even smiled as they watched his weathered blue truck disappear down the road. Family first had quietly become the unspoken rule inside his little garage. Lily climbed into the passenger seat every day carrying a backpack that always seemed too heavy for her small shoulders and a smile that somehow made every difficult day seem lighter. They rarely talked about expensive vacations or luxury homes. Instead, they counted Red Barns during the drive home, stopped once a week for vanilla ice cream, and ended every evening reading one chapter from the same war adventure novel they had started months before. Their little white farmhouse sat on 3 peaceful acres surrounded by cottonwood trees that whispered whenever the Colorado breeze drifted through the valley. Inside the kitchen, a framed photograph rested beside the coffee maker. It showed Ethan, his late wife Grace, and a much younger Lily laughing beneath a bright summer sky. Every morning, Ethan paused for just a few seconds before that photograph. Not because grief controlled him anymore, but because gratitude still did. Grace had once told him that the greatest gift a father could give a child was consistency. Even after she was gone, Ethan held onto those words as though they were directions for living. He repaired engines with patience, folded Lily's school clothes before bed, packed her lunches every morning, and quietly ignored the loneliness that occasionally settled over the empty side of the dinner table. Friends had encouraged him to date again. Customers had tried introducing him to kind women. Even Lily had once asked whether he ever felt lonely. Ethan simply smiled, brushed a loose strand of her blonde hair behind her ear, and answered with complete honesty. "Lonely comes and goes, sweetheart. You stay." Lily hugged him without another question, because children often understood love better than adults did. Ethan believed life did not owe him another miracle. If happiness came again, it would have to arrive gently, never asking his daughter to gamble her heart on someone who might disappear. He did not know that before the week was over, a woman driving a vintage Mustang would unexpectedly pull into his quiet little world and challenge every promise he believed he could never change. Thursday afternoon arrived wrapped in bright Colorado sunshine, and the steady hum of traffic drifted across the quiet highway that curved past Ethan's garage. He had just finished replacing the brakes on an aging family sedan when a low hiss interrupted the peaceful rhythm of the afternoon. About 100 yards beyond the entrance, a deep emerald green 1967 Ford Mustang rolled slowly onto the gravel shoulder before coming to a gentle stop. Steam escaped from beneath the raised hood, shimmering against the warm summer air. Ethan reached for his toolbox without hesitation. Helping stranded drivers had become second nature long before it ever became part of his business. As he approached, he noticed a woman already studying the engine instead of standing beside the car waiting for someone else to solve the problem. She wore simple jeans, brown boots, and a light cream blouse with the sleeves folded neatly to her elbows. There was nothing flashy about her appearance except the quiet confidence with which she examined the engine compartment. Soft chestnut hair shifted gently in the afternoon breeze as she looked up and offered a polite smile. "I was hoping someone around here might know classic Mustangs," she said. Ethan smiled back. "You found the right place." She stepped aside without another word, allowing him room to work. Most people filled moments like this with endless conversation, but she simply watched, curious rather than impatient. Ethan traced the cooling system with experienced hands before tightening a loose hose clamp that had slowly worked itself free after years of vibration. He inspected the radiator, checked the coolant level, and wiped away a small amount of residue with a clean cloth. "Nothing serious," he said. "You caught it before it became expensive." Relief softened her expression. "That is the best news I have heard all week." Ethan laughed quietly as he closed the hood. "Try it now." The Mustang came to life with the deep, smooth rumble only an old American engine could produce. The woman smiled, and for just a second she looked less like someone carrying the weight of the world and more like someone rediscovering an old friend. She reached in her leather handbag and removed a wallet. "Please let me pay you." Ethan gently shook his head. "It took less than 10 minutes. Save your money for the next tank of gas." She hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to hearing that answer. Most people would not refuse. Ethan shrugged. Kindness is cheaper than paperwork. She laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even her. Before climbing back into the driver's seat, she extended her hand. "I am Charlotte. Ethan accepted the handshake with quiet respect. Ethan Walker. She repeated his name as though she wanted to remember it. Thank you, Ethan. Drive safely, Charlotte. The Mustang disappeared beyond the bend, leaving only the fading sound of its engine behind. Ethan returned to the garage and thought little more about the encounter. To him, she had simply been another traveler passing through town. But inside the Mustang, Charlotte Kensington kept glancing into the rearview mirror until the small garage vanished from sight. For the first time in many years, someone had looked at her without recognizing her name, her company, or the fortune attached to it. He had seen only a woman with a broken car, and somehow that simple act of ordinary kindness stayed with her long after the highway stretched empty before her. Charlotte returned to New York before sunrise. Yet the quiet mechanic from Colorado occupied her thoughts more than the stack of acquisition reports waiting on her desk. The headquarters of Kensington Technologies rose above Manhattan in polished glass and steel, where every meeting moved with perfect precision and every decision carried the weight of billions of dollars. Executives filled the boardroom with confident presentations, digital projections, and ambitious forecasts. But Charlotte found herself staring beyond the windows instead of the financial charts before her. One vice president noticed her distraction and smiled. Is something on your mind? She answered with the smallest smile. I met someone who reminded me that not everything valuable has a price. The room fell briefly silent before business resumed, but Charlotte already knew her schedule was about to change. 3 days later, she instructed her assistant to arrange a business trip through Colorado, carefully adjusting the route so it happened to pass a small repair garage outside Denver. She never explained why. When her black SUV pulled into the gravel parking lot that Friday afternoon, Ethan was helping an elderly couple load groceries into the back of their station wagon after repairing a loose trailer hitch without charging them $1. He waved politely when he noticed Charlotte climbing from the passenger seat. Looks like the Mustang is behaving itself, he said with an easy smile. Charlotte laughed softly. Actually, it is. I was just passing through and thought I should properly thank the mechanic who saved my afternoon. Ethan nodded toward the old wooden picnic table beside the garage. Coffee is fresh if you have a few minutes. She accepted without hesitation. They sat beneath the shade of a large cottonwood tree while the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass across the property. Their conversation wandered from classic cars to mountain roads, from favorite books to childhood memories. Ethan never asked what she did for a living, and Charlotte found herself strangely grateful. For nearly an hour, she was simply another traveler sharing coffee with a kind stranger. As she prepared to leave, a sleek black helicopter appeared on the horizon, descending toward a nearby field where her security team had received permission to land. Ethan looked up in mild surprise, but said nothing. Charlotte realized the moment she had hoped to postpone could no longer be avoided. She took one slow breath before speaking. There is something I should have told you. Ethan waited quietly. My full name is Charlotte Kensington. He searched his memory for only a second before recognition appeared in his eyes. The name belonged to magazine covers, television interviews, and one of the largest technology companies in America. Charlotte braced herself for the familiar change she had seen countless times before, the sudden admiration, the awkward excitement, or the endless questions about money and influence. Instead, Ethan simply smiled the same gentle smile she had seen beside the Mustang. That explains the helicopter, he said warmly. I hope your drive home is easier than your first one. Charlotte blinked, almost laughing in disbelief. He had not treated her differently before learning who she was, and he refused to treat her differently afterward. As the helicopter lifted into the Colorado sky, she looked down through the window and watched Ethan return to tightening bolts beneath the hood of an old pickup truck. Surrounded by extraordinary success every day of her life, Charlotte suddenly realized that the most extraordinary man she had met did not seem impressed by any of it, and for the first time in years, that simple truth made her want to know someone even more. The weeks that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them had expected. Charlotte found reasons to visit Colorado that even her executive team could not quite explain. Some trips were officially labeled as regional investment reviews. Others became opportunities to meet with nonprofit organizations or small business owners. Somehow, every schedule seemed to leave an hour free near Walker Auto Repair. Ethan never questioned it. He simply greeted her with the same warm smile, whether she arrived in a rental sedan, the restored Mustang, or a company vehicle driven by someone else. They shared coffee on the old picnic table, talked about books, mountain trails, and Lily's latest science project, but never about stock prices or private jets. Charlotte slowly discovered that silence could be more comforting than luxury. One Saturday morning, she arrived carrying a box of fresh pastries from a small bakery she had found outside Denver. Lily happened to be helping her father organize tools, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she carefully placed sockets back into their proper drawers. Charlotte knelt beside her and asked, "Do you always help around the garage?" Lily smiled proudly. "Dad says if I can borrow the tools, I should learn their names." Charlotte laughed. "That sounds like a good rule." Ethan glanced over from beneath the hood of an old truck. "It works most of the time." The easy conversation felt so natural that Charlotte almost forgot how different their worlds really were. Yet the outside world refused to forget. A customer recognized her while waiting for an oil change. By evening, a photograph had already appeared online showing the billionaire chief executive officer sitting at a weathered picnic table beside a small-town mechanic. Headlines spread quickly across business websites and entertainment pages. Some praised her humility. Others insisted it was a publicity campaign. Television commentators debated whether Ethan Walker was secretly seeking fame. Social media filled with endless opinions from strangers who had never met either of them. Ethan ignored every headline and continued changing tires, repairing engines, and picking Lily up from school at 3:15 each afternoon. Charlotte tried to ignore the noise as well, but her board of directors did not. One executive cautioned that the attention could affect investor confidence. Another suggested creating distance before rumors damaged the company's image. Charlotte listened politely before closing her notebook. "If kindness becomes a liability," she said calmly, "then perhaps we have forgotten what leadership actually means." Her answer ended the discussion, but it did not silence the headlines. Days later, she stopped by the garage after another long meeting. Ethan was sweeping the shop floor while the late afternoon sun poured through the open bay doors. She watched him for a moment before asking quietly, "Does any of this bother you?" He rested the broom against the wall and looked toward the peaceful fields beyond the garage. "People are allowed to tell stories," he replied. "The only story I can control is the one Lily remembers when she grows up." Charlotte lowered her eyes. She realized that while millions admired her success, almost no one understood the quiet strength standing in front of her. And somewhere deep inside her heart, admiration slowly became something much more difficult to hide. Autumn arrived quietly. Across the Colorado foothills, painting the cottonwood trees in shades of gold, while cool evening air carried the scent of pine through the open garage doors. Charlotte found herself looking forward to those peaceful afternoons more than any board meeting or international flight. She no longer arrived with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Sometimes she brought homemade cookies from small bakery Lily loved. Sometimes she simply brought another novel for Ethan after remembering a conversation from weeks before. Every visit felt less like an escape from her world and more like a return to the person she had almost forgotten she could be. One Friday evening, after Lily had gone inside to finish her homework, Charlotte and Ethan remained seated on the old wooden bench outside the garage. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky brushed with soft shades of orange and violet. Crickets began their evening chorus while a gentle breeze stirred the tall grass surrounding the property. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. It was the kind of comfortable silence that could only exist between people who respected each other. Finally, Charlotte turned toward him. "May I ask you something personal?" Ethan nodded gently. "You always can." She folded her hands together, suddenly less confident than the billionaire who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation. "People have introduced you to wonderful women. I know they have. You are kind, dependable, and you have the biggest heart I have ever seen. Yet every time someone gets close, you quietly step away. What? Ethan lowered his eyes toward the weathered porch boards. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but every word carried years of quiet reflection. After Grace passed away, I was not only grieving a wife. Lily was grieving her mother. For a child, hope can become dangerous when it keeps disappearing. Charlotte listened without interrupting. Ethan continued. There were a few women who came into our lives over the years. They were kind people. None of them meant to hurt anyone. Life simply carried them in different directions. But every goodbye left Lily wondering what she had done wrong. She stopped decorating pictures for visitors. She stopped asking whether anyone was coming over for fives. A homemade apple pie deserved applause, even when the crust was slightly uneven. When Lily nervously auditioned for the school choir, Charlotte sat beside Ethan in the third row of the auditorium, smiling with the same anxious excitement as every other parent. She never tried to replace anyone. She simply showed up. Week after week, month after month, her presence became as dependable as the sunrise over the Colorado hills. Ethan noticed everything without saying much. He noticed that Charlotte remembered Lily's favorite hot chocolate without asking. He noticed that she always arrived early enough to help set the dinner table instead of expecting to be served. He noticed that whenever work interrupted one of her visits, she called Lily herself to apologize rather than sending an assistant. The little promises most people forgot became the promises Charlotte protected most carefully. Meanwhile, life inside Kensington Technologies continued moving at its relentless pace. Investors demanded expansion into overseas markets. Financial analysts praised Charlotte's leadership while criticizing the increasing amount of time she spent away from headquarters. One afternoon, her senior executive team gathered around the long walnut conference table overlooking Manhattan. Charts covered the large presentation screen, projecting projected profits that could reshape the company for the next decade. An executive finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Charlotte, are you planning to relocate part of your schedule to Colorado?" She answered calmly, "I'm planning to spend more time where people remember my name before they remember my title." The room became unusually quiet. Nobody argued because the sincerity in her voice left no room for debate. Back in Colorado, autumn slowly surrendered to the first hints of winter. One evening, Ethan returned from locking the garage and found Charlotte and Lily sitting on the living room floor surrounded by colored paper, ribbons, and handmade ornaments for the annual church holiday fair. They were laughing over a crooked paper snowflake that refused to fold correctly. Charlotte looked up and smiled. "I think we accidentally invented a new shape." Lily giggled. "Dad says it looks like Texas after a windy day." Ethan laughed harder than he had in years. The sound surprised even him. Grace had once filled this little farmhouse with laughter that echoed through every room. After she was gone, silence had quietly become part of the walls. Now laughter had returned, not because someone was trying to erase the past, but because someone had chosen to honor it without fear. Later that night, after Charlotte drove back to her hotel, Lily helped her father wash the dinner dishes. She dried a plate carefully before looking up with thoughtful eyes. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart." Miss Charlotte never forgets when she says she is coming back. Ethan stopped drying the glass in his hand. Lily continued softly. "She keeps her promises." He looked through the kitchen window toward the snow beginning to fall beneath the porch light. For the first time since Grace had whispered her final words years ago, the promise he had made to protect his daughter's heart no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a door that someone had been patiently knocking on without ever asking to be let inside. Winter settled gently across the valley, covering the fields around the farmhouse with a blanket of fresh snow that reflected the pale morning sunlight like scattered diamonds. Life moved peacefully until one unexpected phone call changed the course of an ordinary Tuesday. Ethan had just finished replacing the transmission on a family van when the school nurse called to explain that Lily had developed a sudden high fever during class. Without hesitation, he locked the garage, thanked his waiting customers for their patience, and drove toward Pine Ridge Elementary. At nearly the same moment, Charlotte was standing inside the executive conference room at Kensington Technologies' Denver regional office, preparing to finalize the largest partnership in the company's history. The agreement represented years of planning and would open thousands of new jobs across several states. Lawyers, investors, and government officials had already taken their seats around the conference table. Just before Charlotte entered the room, her telephone vibrated quietly. It was a short message from Ethan. "Lily is sick. I'm taking her home. She'll be fine. Do not worry." Charlotte stood perfectly still for several seconds. The meeting coordinator approached with a welcoming smile. "Everyone is ready whenever you are." Charlotte looked through the glass wall toward the crowded conference room before glancing once more at Ethan's message. Then she calmly removed the folder from her hands and gave it to her chief operating officer. "You know this agreement as well as I do," she said. "Please lead the meeting." The executive blinked in surprise. "You are leaving?" Charlotte nodded. "There is somewhere I need to be." 45 minutes later, her vehicle pulled quietly into the driveway beside Ethan's farmhouse, carrying nothing more expensive than a small bag filled with soup, medicine, coloring books, and a new puzzle Lily had admired weeks earlier at a local store. Ethan opened the front door, surprised to see her standing on the porch with snowflakes resting on her wool coat. "You did not have to come," he said gently. Charlotte smiled. "I know. That is why I came." Inside the warm kitchen, Lily rested beneath a blanket on the living room couch while an old fireplace filled the house with gentle crackling sounds. Charlotte sat beside her, reading chapters from their favorite adventure novel until Lily slowly drifted to sleep. Ethan watched quietly from the doorway, noticing how naturally Charlotte lowered her voice whenever Lily stirred and how carefully she tucked the blanket around her shoulders without waking her. Hours passed. Outside, reporters waited in Denver for the chief executive officer, who never arrived. Financial news channels speculated about delayed negotiations. Analysts questioned whether the agreement would survive without Charlotte's presence. None of that reached the peaceful farmhouse where homemade chicken soup simmered on the stove, and a quiet woman chose to spend her afternoon beside a child who simply needed someone to stay. Late that evening, after Lily's fever finally began to ease, Ethan walked Charlotte to her car beneath a sky filled with bright winter stars. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know what happened today?" Charlotte smiled softly. A little girl started feeling better. Ethan slowly shook his head. "No, today you proved something I've been afraid to believe for a very long time." Charlotte waited silently. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the warm light shining through the farmhouse windows where Lily slept peacefully inside. When life asks you to choose between the biggest opportunity in your career and the smallest promise you ever made to a child, you chose the promise. For the first time since Grace had left this world, Ethan felt fear quietly giving way to trust, and somewhere deep within his heart, hope finally found the courage to come home. 1 year later, the first warm days of spring returned to the Colorado Valley, and the old cottonwood trees outside Walker Auto Repair swayed gently beneath a bright blue sky. The garage looked much the same as it always had, except for one small wooden sign Lily had painted by hand that now hung beside the entrance. It read, "Kindness always finds its way home." Customers smiled whenever they noticed it, and Ethan never corrected the uneven lettering because it reminded him that the best things in life were rarely perfect. Charlotte's visits had never stopped. They had simply become part of the rhythm of everyday life. Some weekends, she helped organize community food drives. Other afternoons, she stood beside Ethan at local charity events without cameras or announcements. She quietly funded improvements for the town library, but asked that every donation remain anonymous. The people of Pine Ridge knew her not as a billionaire, but as the woman who remembered birthdays, attended school concerts, and always stayed until the last folding chair had been stacked away. Lily trusted her completely now. One Saturday morning, while they planted wildflowers along the fence outside the farmhouse, Lily looked up with dirt on her gloves and sunlight dancing across her smile. "Miss Charlotte?" Charlotte smiled back. "Yes." Lily tilted her head thoughtfully. "You never left." Charlotte gently placed the small gardening shovel on the ground before, kneeling beside her. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "I never planned to." Lily wrapped her arms around Charlotte without another word. From the porch, Ethan quietly watched the moment unfold. He remembered every promise he had made beside Grace's hospital bed years earlier. He had promised to protect their daughter, to teach her courage, and never to let another goodbye break her heart if he could help it. Standing there beneath the morning sun, he realized that protecting someone did not always mean keeping the world away. Sometimes it meant recognizing the rare soul who had already proven, day after ordinary day, that love was not measured by grand declarations but by faithful presence. Several weeks later, the Kensington Foundation hosted another charity gala in Denver. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, just as it had the previous year, and many of the same guests returned expecting another unforgettable evening. They received one. As the music softened and conversations faded, Ethan walked toward Charlotte with calm confidence. Lily stood nearby wearing a pale blue dress and holding a small velvet box with both hands. Charlotte looked at him with gentle curiosity, remembering another evening in the same room when she had gathered every ounce of courage simply to ask one honest question. Ethan accepted the little box from Lily before turning toward Charlotte. His voice remained steady, carrying quietly across the silent ballroom. "A year ago you asked me why I would not date you. I could not answer with hope because I had not yet learned whether hope was safe for my daughter." He paused as tears quietly gathered in Charlotte's eyes. "You never argued with my fears. You simply outlived them with patience, kindness, and every promise you chose to keep. You never tried to become someone else. You simply showed us who you had always been." He slowly opened the velvet box, revealing a simple ring that reflected the warm ballroom lights. "I was not ready then," he said softly. "But today, if you are still willing, I would be honored to spend the rest of my ordinary Tuesdays with you." Charlotte could not speak. She simply nodded through grateful tears as the room remained completely silent. There was no applause at first, no cheering, only hundreds of people witnessing something money could never purchase and power could never command. Lily smiled through happy tears before gently taking Charlotte's hand and placing it into her father's. In that quiet moment, every headline, every fortune, and every title disappeared, leaving only three hearts finally united by the simple truth that the greatest miracles are not found in extraordinary lives, but in ordinary people who choose, day after day, to keep showing up for one another.